Yeah, summarizing 16. So 16 involves the pouring out of the bowls of wrath. The introduction to that was in chapter 15, I think. The seven bowls, 15 and 16. But basically, um, all of it, of course, is figurative, and I paralleled it to the opening up of the seven seals, which took place in chapter 6 and ran through chapter 11. So there is simply a duplicate vision of those things, and the similarities are striking. The same language, the same things that are mentioned as far as what is going to be struck, and it's just this Jewish apocalyptic language that is duplicated from chapter 6, particularly chapter 6, the opening of the seals, and that's how I've understood what happened here. But speaking about it all in the sense of upon the Jewish nation, and that's how I would summarize it in just a couple of sentences there. I represent it fairly? All right. Let's look at chapter 17, and this will be it's kind of a difficult passage for all schools of thought, really. But I believe, of course, we do have three figures that are here, three identities. The harlot, that is the harlot riding upon the beast, and then we have the church. So let's look at, I want to read the first 7 verses, and then I'll tell you what, let's just read the chapter. It divides itself into 1 through 7, and then beginning in verse 8, we'll finish the chapter that way. I'm going to give you, and I'll give you my thoughts on the chapter and what it refers as we come back to it. So let's look at the chapter first. Chapter 17. So this is after the bowls have been poured out. You notice the chapter 16, 17, the seventh bowl has already been poured out on the air. The great city, verse 19, I've taken it to be Jerusalem, and he called it Babylon the Great. Verse 19, was remembered in the sight of God. So here's another scene. Now it just opens up another picture. There came one of the 7 angels that had the 7 bowls and spoke with me and said, "Come here, and I will show you the judgment of the great harlot that sits upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and they that dwell in the earth were made drunken with the wine of her fornication." He carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, decked with gold and precious stone and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abominations, even the unclean things of her fornication. Upon her head a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of the harlots of the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs. And when I saw her, I wondered with a great wonder. The angel said unto me, Why do you wonder? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast that carries her, which has 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to come up out of the abyss and go into perdition. They that dwell on the earth shall wonder, they whose name has not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast, how he was, is not, and shall come. Here's the mind that has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are 7 kings. 5 are fallen. 1 is, the other is not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a little while. The beast that was and is not is himself an 8th, and is of the 7. He goes into perdition. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings, who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. These have one mind. They give their power and authority unto the beast. These shall war against the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And they shall overcome, and they also shall overcome that are with him, called the chosen and faithful. He said unto me, The waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw in the beast, these shall hate the harlot. They shall make her desolate, and naked shall eat her flesh, and shall burn her utterly with fire. For God did put in their hearts to do his mind, to come to one mind, to give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God should be accomplished. The woman whom you saw is the great city which reigns over the lands of the kings of the earth. All right, so we have 2 things. Number 1, the vision. And number 2, the explanation. The vision takes us 1 through 6, the explanation 7 and following. So in this, I'm not going to right now just delve into the verses 9 and 10, the 7 heads or 7 mountains and so forth upon which the woman sits. We've already talked about all that, which I take to be, of course, that be Rome. And the 7 heads, 7 mountains, and then we also have the 7 heads or 7 kings. So you have 2 different, the image referring to 2 different things here. And we do have, however, kings that are arisen and fallen, and that would be, of course, the kings that led us up to Nero, the one that is, and then there will become one after that. So the one that's on the throne now is the 6th king. We saw that. So all of that we've already talked about at length. So I didn't want to go into that unless you want to plumb some of that some more a little bit. But let's notice the things regarding the identity, particularly of the woman and of the beast. So in my view, I believe that the woman is the city of Jerusalem and refers to the harlot, that is a woman, that is a picture of Judaism at the time, was unfaithful to God, and she is drunken with the blood of the saints, because that's how the book of Acts, in my view, depicts it, as Judaism was that which had persecuted the saints, and so she was drunken with the blood of the saints. The beast upon which she rides is the Roman Empire. That's how I understand the chapter to be unfolding. And I'm trying to keep in sync with what we have seen previously. So let me give you some reasons why I believe that the harlot is the city of Jerusalem specifically, and the people of the Jews. Number 1, the word harlot, always used in the Old Testament at least, of a covenant people who have broken the covenant with God. And so the prophets will say frequently that Jerusalem, Judaism, was a harlot. Well, how so? Because she had broken the covenant with God. And so Ezekiel will depict it in very vivid terms about how she had gone and sought after lovers that would be other nations to make alliances with. And when in point of fact, she should have been relying upon God. But that is the way the word harlot is used consistently in the Old Testament, referring to someone who has been unfaithful to the covenant. In my thinking, that would not apply to Rome per se. Rome would be the beast upon which she rides, but Jerusalem, Judaism, at the time, having authority from the Roman kings, would be drunken with the blood of the saints, and that comes to another point in just a moment. That comes down to verses 6 and 7. The reason for her punishment is that she is drunken with the blood of the saints. As far as the New Testament scope is concerned, the only figure that is drunken with the blood of the saints is the Jewish nation. That's all we have in Acts. So Paul makes that, of course, that telling statement in 1 Thessalonians 2, 14 through 16, where he points out that the wrath has come upon them, that is just about to occur, upon them to the uttermost, because they had killed the prophets, drove out us, pleased not God, contrary to all men, forbidding us to speak to the Gentiles that they may be saved. But the wrath has come upon them to the uttermost. Throughout the book of Acts, the only people that had persecuted God's church was the Jews. It was always the way it was. As a matter of fact, I have a book in my library called For Fear of the Jews, written by, I think his name is Rittenhouse. At any rate, he's using phraseology. Where does that phrase come from, by the way? For fear of the Jews. Used 3 times in this particular letter. Gospel. Comes from the Gospel of John, used 3 times, for fear of the Jews, for fear of the Jews, for fear of the Jews. And things that were occurring with the apostles and those related to our Lord, and we're told it was because of the fear of the Jews. And the people would not be able to speak openly about him for fear of the Jews, for fear of the Jews. For fear of the Jews also carries us into the book of Acts. And I don't find any assault upon the apostles, excepting perhaps it would be Acts 17, where they took him to Mars Hill and demanded that he speak to a pagan crowd. They were pagan people. but I don't find any assault upon the apostles that was not initiated and carried forth except by the Jews, sometimes utilizing Rome. But they would drag them before the Roman governors, but that was utilizing the Roman nation and the Roman authority to get their own ends. And so that's how I understand what we have here. They're the ones drunken with the blood of the saints. And it gives us also a picture as what our Lord had to say in Matthew 23 when he tells the Jewish people, he said that they were guilty of the blood of all of the prophets, from Abel, the blood of the righteous Abel, unto the blood of Zechariah the son of Berechiah, whom you slew between the altar and the sanctuary. He said, all of these things are coming upon this generation. That would take us from Genesis all the way to 2 Chronicles, I think toward the end of the book, chapter 33, I think it is, where Zechariah, a prophet, stood up and they killed him right there in the altar, beside the altar. They killed him. And so Jesus says that all of the blood of the righteous that had been shed through the ages, shed by the Jews, would be held accountable in this generation. And that's how he put it in Matthew 23. You remember that passage? So that being the case, I take it that this is parallel to that. Now that's my thought on the subject regarding drunken with the blood of the saints. Some of you look at me like, okay, let's see, and I can't remember that. So let's look at that passage, Matthew 23. This will be starting with verse 34. We'll start at actually verse 33. Fill up the measure of your fathers, verse 32. You serpents, you offspring of vipers, how shall you escape the judgment of hell? Therefore, behold, I send unto you prophets, wise men, and scribes. Some of them you shall kill and crucify. Some of them you shall scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city, that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of Abel the righteous unto the blood of Zechariah the son of Berechiah, whom you slew between the altar and the sanctuary. Verily I say unto you, all these things shall come upon this generation. Zechariah was killed in 2 Chronicles, the end of it. And that takes us from the beginning of Jewish history to the end of the historical books. And you say, well, that's not the end of the Old Testament. Well, it really is, because we have the poetic books, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, so forth, all going to be in the same time frame as Genesis through 2 Chronicles. We have all of the prophets, Isaiah all the way through Malachi, set in the time all the way through 2 Chronicles, excepting, of course, the coming back from captivity, which would be Ezra, Nehemiah, and Malachi, and Habakkuk as well. Zechariah too, Zechariah, Malachi, all those books were really set after when they came back from captivity. But all of the Jewish nation history really is summarized and finished in 2 Chronicles. So Jesus points out that all the blood is shed by the Jewish people. Now that strikes people today very peculiar. Why does that strike them as peculiar? To even talk this way as I'm talking. Why do people today find it peculiar or perhaps even distasteful for me to speak the way that I'm speaking about the Jewish people, or those who are responsible for the murder of the apostles and our Lord? Right. They think they're God's chosen people still. Yep. The media feeds us that. Denominational world is filled with it, thinking the Jews still are the chosen people of God. And number three, we are constantly fed from the media that the Jews are the most persecuted people on the earth and Christians persecuted Jews. Now we're told that on a constant diet. What is wrong with that picture? Well, number one, it's the opposite. I don't deny that Jews were persecuted in the Middle Ages. I don't deny that. Well, were they Christians who did that? Was it the Lord's church doing that? Who was it? The Roman Catholic Church. And there is no correlation between the New Testament church and the Roman Catholic Church. I frankly grow weary of hearing people say, well, Christians persecuted people too. Christians used to persecute people. I say, which Christians did it? Where did that happen? It was always the Roman church. I said, no, you're confusing the Roman church and the Crusades going back to Palestine. You're confusing the New Testament church with the Roman Catholic apostasy. That's right. So that kind of feeds into something I'm going to talk about in our lesson, and that is how our language kind of molds our thinking and think, well, we're all Christians and everybody's a Christian, so Christians did persecute Jews. So you don't read any articles that talk about this subject where that kind of thing is not asserted. And I hear that all the time. I hear it at school, I hear it professors, I hear it in the media, I hear it in entertainment, that, okay, Christians are responsible for persecuting Jews. No, that's wrong. That's wrong. The opposite is the truth. And that's what we have in the first century. All right, yes, ma'am. What time? No. There was no such thing as a Roman Catholic Church until the 6th, 7th century. No such thing as the Roman Church until the 7th century. The first pope was crowned in 606 AD. Now, the Roman Catholic Church, okay, we're off on a little tangent, but that's okay. I'll try to keep it brief. But the Roman Catholic Church has concocted a fabrication that the popes go all the way back to Peter. That is absolutely historical lie. There's no such thing. There's no such thing at all. The first pope, and it's very clear in the historical record from numerous historical authorities that speak about how that came about. So it was an apostasy from the 2nd century all the way until the 7th, when the first pope was crowned. And then he was not even infallible until the 19th century, 100 years ago, 1870s. He declared that he was infallible. So that's an apostasy. So there's no such thing as a Roman Catholic Church in the 1st century. No such thing. In the 2nd century, no such thing. 3rd, no such thing. So that is, but I'm simply pointing out that in the Middle Ages, there was a lot of persecution by the Roman Catholic Church against God's true people who said, I want to be only Christians, but they persecuted them. And you can read about that, all the people who tried to translate the Bible and were persecuted because of it. The Roman Catholic Church burned them at the stake. They also persecuted Jews. And so now people say, well, okay, Christians persecuted Jews too, so you have a bad history yourself. Well, we get lost and all of that. So that's why I want to make clarification on that. Yes, ma'am. Because no one really gets, huh? Well, it's just a politically correct thing to do. It's not biblical. It's not oriented in the Bible. It is just what people do because that's the same thing regarding, okay, here's an example. The Judeo-Christian ethic. How many times have you heard Judeo-Christian ethic? How many times? Yeah, it's just constant bombardment with Judeo-Christian ethics. All right, well, is there a Judeo-Christian ethic? Isn't it interesting, if you go back before 1950, you never hear of Judeo-Christian ethic. Never heard it. Not one time is it written that I have ever found. And so even Wikipedia says in the 1950s, the word became in usage, Judeo-Christian. Our founding fathers, you never read about, we want a Judeo-Christian country. You never heard that from them. They wanted a Christian nation. They didn't call it a Judeo-Christian. What happened? We have become, from the opening of the 20th century until today, captivated by premillennial Jewish first doctrine. And so they made it, okay, it's all Jewish Christians, so there's Messianic Jews today, there's premillennial doctrines, and all these things has nothing to do with the New Testament. So that has become just so common in our parlance and the way we speak that it has begun to mold the way we think. So that's what happened. That's what's happened here. Same thing regarding Roman Catholicism. Okay, everybody's Christians because it's in politics to say otherwise. And that's why. Sure, yeah, sure. Everybody does, yeah. So the truth of the matter is, though, what does the Bible teach? And how do we determine what is a Christian? How do we determine that? It's not about what's in politics or politically correct. It's about what does the Bible teach. Lisa? Right. Well, the last week's? Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. 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 Well, yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. That I know, and we've kind of gotten off a little bit here, but that's just one of the sad things about the refusal to get down and have discussions about, okay, what does the Bible actually say about certain things? Yeah. Well, okay, on Fox News, for example, they say, "Oh, we want a Christian representative." They'll have a Catholic priest on there. It's like, oh boy, every time. That's right, every single time. So, yeah. Oh, yeah, they'll say we want a Christian represented, we want a Jew, and we want a Muslim. Okay, so they get a Catholic priest with his collar backwards on there to represent Christianity. I thought, okay. So, but that's just how things shake out in the modern society. But that's because we are a little bit reticent to think about the issues clearly. Anyway, any other thoughts on it? All right, let's go back to Revelation 17. So, furthermore, if you look at chapter 17 and verse 18, he tells us this is the great city, the great city. We'll come back to how it reigns over the earth in just a moment. What is the great city? Well, he says it's the great city, so it is a current city at that time. It is not in the country of Iraq today. It's not Baghdad. It is not in Syria. It was a current city, so it's a great city that reigns over the kings of the earth. So let's look at that. How is it that, if this is Judaism, well, just before we get to that, we'll come back to verse 18. Here's another thing. The harlot has, what kind of clothing is she wearing here? Yep, scarlet, verse 4, gold, precious stone, pearls, having in her hand a cup full of abominations, forehead written. So what does that remind us of, the clothing that she's wearing? Now, forehead has a plate on her forehead that reads this. What does that remind us of? High priestly attire. It's what the priest would wear. It's exactly the colors he would wear. He had inscribed on his head, not harlot, mother of abominations, but what? It said holy to Jehovah. Holy to Jehovah. But now, he says, now there's another name now, and it is mother of the harlot of abominations. So, in my mind, he's singling out the Jewish nation by the clothing that the harlot wears. Here's another one, verse 9. We're told that the mind that has wisdom, the 7 heads are 7 mountains upon which the woman sits. All right, the 7 mountains are obviously, at least I think they are, obviously what city? Rome. Well, the woman sits on the 7 mountains. I think that would be an identity different than the mountains itself. That is, the woman sits on the mountains. How does that work then? Well, she had all of her authority and all of her power to do anything that she wanted to do from Rome, and she was in league with Rome. As a matter of fact, that's what I take to be the very last verse, where it says that she reigns over the kings of the earth. That is, Judaism, the Jewish people, actually in league with Rome continually, and manipulated the Roman Empire to do her will in persecuting all these Christians. That's what she did, and the Jewish people continued to manipulate Rome to do that, until finally Rome had enough of that, and then they, of course, Rome destroyed Jerusalem. Now that's how I understand verse 18. Now you might have a different thought on it, a different direction. That's all right. That doesn't make it wrong. But you might offer something if you care to on the different direction on that one. David, did you have anything to mention? I believe the great city is the city of Jerusalem. But the city, yeah, right, yeah. Yeah, she's the one who's city, yeah. The woman whom thou sawest is the great city, and she reigns over the kings of the earth. I believe that's Jerusalem. And she reigns over the kings of the earth in the sense that she is in league with Rome, and she utilized and manipulated Rome to do her will. So that's my view of what's taking place here. Now, a lot of people suggest that, no, the woman has to be Rome. And then the beast would be, well, how would that be? Because the beast, so how would that be? What was the beast? So that may be, and I'm not saying that's not the case, but I believe that in keeping with what we've had thus far, all it is about the destruction of Jerusalem and the destroying of Judaism and wiping it out, I believe that the harlot is Jerusalem. And now we're not changing gears all of a sudden in chapter 17, say now we're going to talk about the destruction of Rome. I find that a little bit difficult to bring into harmony. Go ahead, Ray. Yeah. So that's right. So that's but the woman is sitting on the 7 mountains. So the 7 heads on the beast, the 7 mountains, that would be the Roman Empire. Yeah. And the 7 heads, then he tells us, are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, 1 is, and 1 is. So 7 heads represents the mountains and also represents the kings. And the kings I do take to be kings or emperors of Rome. That's my thought on it. I think most everyone who comes to this chapter and looks at the 7 heads or 7 mountains understands that at least that part of it is referring to Rome, and we have Roman kings that are listed here, beginning with Julius Caesar, Augustus, so forth. Go ahead. Did Rome have the Jews do their bidding? In what sense? Well, Paul says the Jews did. Yeah, but they had the Romans do it. So right. So Rome did the bidding of the Jews. Right. Yeah. That's correct. I was thinking you said it the other way, but that's right. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I may have heard it in a different direction. After this weekend's debate, I might be hearing things differently. Now, what's being said here? Yeah. So yeah, I believe that's exactly right. That Rome did the Jewish bidding. So, matter of fact, that's exactly what is stated in John chapter 11. Remember where the high priest Caiaphas came together with the Jewish Sanhedrin council and said, "What are we doing here? If we leave him alone, the Jews will come and take away both our place and our nation. So it's better that one man should die for the people." And that became a prophecy. That's an interesting prophecy in itself right there. He was mentioning it to say, let's get him out of the way, but it became a prophecy about Christ. So that's how I understand what's going on in chapter 17. If you differ with me, that's fine. You may have some points that you want to make on that, maybe having studied ahead or having studied behind. Also, let's look at this one, verse 16. The 10 horns which you saw and the beast, these shall hate the harlot, make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and shall burn her utterly with fire. I take it that is a reference to the destruction of Jerusalem myself. But that's the beast upon which she rides, that she was utilizing, but now turns on her and destroys her. And that's how I think that this chapter lays itself out. Rome, yeah, which would be the beast is Rome, harlot, woman, Jerusalem, the Jews, Judaism, riding on the beast. So the beast finally turns on her and eats her, destroys her. Now that's how I think that the chapter lays out. Yeah. Otherwise, if you're thinking differently, I don't know exactly how it would play out regarding the beast eating the harlot if the harlot is Rome itself. I don't. Unless we take this all the way down to the year 476, where the Western Empire fell, and then even 1,000 years later, or maybe 800 years later, when the Eastern Empire fell, Constantinople. So I think. So at least I'm trying to be consistent with how we've been interpreting thus far. Well, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. But that's how I understand this chapter to unfold. So let's look at a couple of other things real quickly here. And then we have, this is kind of interesting language, verse 8. The beast that was and is not and is to come. I think the beast here is the corporate of Rome. And how is it the beast was and is not? Well, what happened when Nero was murdered? Remember, Nero was murdered in 64. We've talked about him. He was the sixth ruler on the throne. He was murdered. His guard and the people had turned against him. He hid in his villa, and they were coming for him, and he killed himself. And a pretty gruesome scene. But so it looked at that time that the empire would absolutely collapse, because it would be the same thing as if taking place in America, something like that going on in Washington, D.C. It would look like, okay, we're in turmoil here. And so they had army commanders that would come in one after the other and take over the empire. So there's Otho Vitellius, let's say Otho Vitellius, and one other, what was his name? Anyway, there are three of them that took over. And they all ruled only for a matter of months, because there would be one coup after another coup attempt. And then one would take over, and then another one would take over. And so that's how it looked like it was, the entire empire was in turmoil. And so when that happens, all the lands that they were controlling all over the world now saw their opportunities to break free and to go their own direction. And that's looked like what's going to happen. So the empire looked like it was going to unravel just right now. But what happened was that Titus came to the throne, and he was able to consolidate everything. And or Vespasian, I think, and Titus was his son. So they was able to consolidate everything, bring it together, and then they had actually finished up now the destruction of Jerusalem at that point in 70. Because Nero had first dispatched the Roman armies, and then so the Roman armies were surrounding Jerusalem. Now this empire starts collapsing, and so it had to come together quickly, and so it did. And so Vespasian took over, and then his son finally finished off the city of Jerusalem. So that's how I understand Revelation 17. I hope that's helpful. I don't know that, I guess the only passage that would be really, I think, difficult or at least challenging to that interpretation is verse 18, ruling over the kings of the earth. And people say, how could Judaism or the Jewish nation rule over the kings of the earth? But I've given you my thought on it. So, all right, happy to hear you on yours. Anything? That's just like, oh, mum's the word. Okay, thank you for your participation. I always enjoy visiting with you on these important things. So next week, chapter 18, and we're moving into another section where we come to 18, 19, 20, and then victory of the church. So that's how it's going to play out.